Hi, this is Brass Check, and I'm recording this on November 29th, 2020. We're going to do a little original content. We haven't done any in a while. It's hard to repeat the same things over and over again. If you are new to Brass Check or you haven't been checking out all of our material, if you start with our February 1st post, you'll see that we've done some of the absolute best reporting on the COVID con. I don't think there's no better. There may be some equal, but there's clearly no better. We did the film Fauci's First Fraud, which I hope everybody's seen. If not, look it up on the site and make sure you see it. We did the complete detailing of the $100 million plus that Bill Gates has given to the news media all over the world, Le Monde and Paris and all the various, the BBC, NPR, the Los Angeles Times, you name it, he's written them multi-million-dollar checks over the last 10 plus years. So it's not a surprise that they're treating him like a senior statesman and a scientist, which is of course, ridiculous. But anyway, we did report on that. The details, we get into the details, which for some odd reason, nobody else or few seem to want to be doing. Anyway, today we're going to address a bigger topic, which is the topic of reset. And reset seems to be on everybody's mind, and that's a good thing. And I've been waiting for the professional academic or the professional news analyst to talk about great resets of the past. And I guess they're not going to do it. So we're going to talk about the great resets of the past. What is a reset? Well, reset is you have some kind of a catastrophe, and you use that catastrophe as a justification to, and then just fill in the blank with whatever crazy thing you have in mind. Let's look at one of the most amazing resets that took place in broad daylight, and I don't think 1 out of 10 million people are aware of it. The automobile. Clearly, the automobile was on track to do what it's done, which is dominate human life. The fueling of the automobile, a very important subject, right? Whoever controlled that was going to make pretty much infinite money. Were you aware that when automobiles were first invented, they ran on alcohol? They even made cars that would run on alcohol or gasoline. You could just sort of flip a switch, a mechanical switch, and run it on a different fuel. And farmers were kind of excited because it gave them a market for their crops. Because, of course, alcohol is made from plant material. That's how automobiles began. Because gasoline was rare, difficult to manufacture, dangerous to transport, dangerous to store, and toxic to use. So there really wasn't a whole lot of reason why we should be driving gasoline-powered cars when we've got, huge swaths of farmland where we could grow all kinds of, alcohol-producing plants. So why did we go with gasoline? It begins with a P. Prohibition. Nobody ever asks, how in the world did prohibition even happen? America has always been, and still is to a degree, though lesser, a hard drinking country. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that, but that's a historical fact. And when prohibition passed, there was no such thing as a socially progressive, health-conscious U.S. senator or congressman. That didn't exist. And by the way, all men. There were no women in legislature. And yet a group of women, temperance advocates, somehow managed to convince these otherwise totally corrupt, hard-drinking men who begrudged them the right to vote, decided, ladies, you're right, we're going to shut down one of the biggest industries in the country and make our lives miserable. Does that make any sense? Well, when you realize that it was the John Rockefeller who bankrolled the Temperance League, and the Temperance League distributed money very lavishly and abundantly, suddenly prohibition makes sense. Now, why would old John D. Rockefeller do that? Well, it took time to build a nationwide network of gasoline stations. Think about it. We're a big country. And, without having those stations everywhere, gasoline wasn't going to win. And you couldn't build them in a week. You couldn't build them in a month. You couldn't build them in a year. It took years to build out that network. And guess what happened when that network was complete? Prohibition was abolished, and we went back to normal. That was a reset, folks, in broad daylight. And again, I don't think 1 out of 10 million people realize it happened. Maybe that number will be a little bit higher now. Let's look at another great reset, World War I. Now, bullshit to the contrary, World War I had absolutely nothing to do with the United States or, humanity or saving people or truth, justice, and the American way. World War I was a family dispute between two royal families. One controlled England and one controlled Germany, and they both were jockeying for power over Europe and over world markets. Germany was building a navy of significant size. They also built a train line, wait for it, to Iraq. They were going to be tapping the Iraq oil fields and sending that oil straight to Germany. You may not be aware, but ships used to be coal-powered, and one of the big innovations of the early 20th century was making them oil-powered, and that Winston Churchill had something to do with that. Anyway, there was a dispute between those two powers, had absolutely nothing to do with us. Didn't matter to us one way or another who won. Let me see. And how many, just looking this up, how many Americans lost their lives in World War I? Not many compared to other countries. I mean, it was just a complete disaster for Europe. But you know what? 53,000 Americans lost their lives in that war, a war that we had no business being in. And of course, deaths are just the smallest tip of the iceberg. There's permanent injuries that people never recover from. There's psychological injuries. And then there's the militarization of society, which is what World War I was all about from the U.S. point of view. If you read the work of the great Upton Sinclair and his book called The Brass Check, it's a rambling book. he didn't edit it very well, but there's a lot of gems in there, a lot of them. And one of the things that he pointed out, and he wrote this book 100 years ago, right in, when all this World War I fraud was fresh, that there was a very, very strong labor movement in the United States. Because the United States was heavily industrialized, industrial workers were severely abused, and mining workers and others. And the labor unions were quite powerful, quite organized, and were creating change. And then all of a sudden, well, we got to regiment society because it's wartime. Over there, la-da-da-da-da-da, right? All the songs, 'cause the Yanks are coming. The Yanks are coming. So great distraction. And that's really one of the foundations of resets. It's magic. It's sleight of hand. You need a great distraction. So you couldn't very well go and brutalize labor leaders in broad daylight, although they did. But it was a little unseemly. So what happened was a lot of labor leaders were also, rightly so, anti-war. They didn't see why people should be drafted. By the way, World War I brought us the draft. We had a draft during the Civil War, which was another reset. I won't even get into that one. But then the draft was suspended, and then suddenly we needed to draft people again, to draft men again, and send them to their deaths. We needed to do that because of World War I, right? Because of the virus, right? Everything because of the ... right? So we got the draft out of that. And of course, labor leaders and other real, genuine leaders were outspoken. And suddenly they were enemies of the state because we were at war. And then when the war ended, suddenly we had to worry about all these Bolsheviks. And there is truth, to some of that. But most 99% of the people who were agitating for decency in this country were just good Americans that wanted to exercise their supposedly constitutional rights and battle a industrial cartel that was quite abusive. But World War I shut all that down. World War I also, and post World War I too, we had a little Cold War. That was our first our first Ruski scare. The Ruskies are going to get us. World War I, in addition to ushering in the draft, ushered in the Pentagon as we know it, and gave the fledgling Walker family, as in George Walker Bush, their first run at a military fortune. Yes, indeed. Mr. Walker handled procurement for the Pentagon and made himself very, 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 very rich that way. It became a family tradition. What else happened around World War I? Well, we got, I mentioned already, the draft. We got the Pentagon. Oh, we got income tax. Yeah, we didn't have income tax before World War I. Economic activity was taxed. Imports were taxed. People's salaries weren't taxed. That was crazy. Someone goes out and works themselves half to death, and then you take a third or a half of it. Well, that became normalized because ... the war. What else happened with the Great Reset around World War I? The Fed. The Fed. We suddenly needed to, just start rationalizing our banking system. And we did that by giving the levers of power, not the total levers of power, but powers of great influence to a handful of privately owned banks. And if you look it up, they are the ones that actually own the Fed. It is not a federal institution. And all that was justified around the World War I catastrophe. So that was a great reset. How about the Depression, the Great Depression? Was that engineered? You better believe it. You better believe they were as inept as they possibly could be and prolonged that thing for as long as they possibly could. What was the purpose of that? Well, under the cover of providing social services, and, some of those social services were needed. But, it was like, that you give a spoon full of help and then you take away a barrel. And that's basically what the Roosevelt era was about. And it was about the incredible centralization of federal power in the United States. And then along came World War II, which we were shocked to be in. What a shock. What a shock. We've been provoking the Japanese now nonstop for 10 years, threatening their survival, and they attack our fleet in the Pacific. I think what they were thinking, sometimes you're in a street fight, your best thing is to just punch that person in the nose as hard as you can and hope that he says, okay, I get it. Let's forget this dispute. Well, we of course didn't go that way. And maybe no one says we should have, but that's probably what Japan was intending. Not to justify them, but we were provoking them. If you do the history, we were basically squeezing them economically and materially and industrially. And of course, the people who were running Japan were absolute savages too. So it's a complex situation. But anyway, it's not a surprise that Japan attacked us. And everyone needs to remember or know, if you didn't know, when Germany, rode into Poland and Czechoslovakia and ultimately Russia, they were riding in on Ford-built engines, GM-built engines, Standard Oil, DuPont plastics, Chase Manhattan financing. It's unbelievable, the amount of financing and technology transfers, including militarily sensitive technology transfers, the United States was engaged in full throttle in the 1930s. We couldn't do enough for Hitler. IBM was involved, Coca-Cola. I mean, it's just like, they loved the guy. They loved him. Why? Because there was a reset going on in Europe. And again, it had to do with labor. Right? We had this big depression in Europe, and labor was getting agitated. And there were two guys who were really good at keeping labor in its place. In Italy, you had a guy named Mussolini. That was his specialty. That's where he got started. That's what put him on the map. He was good at suppressing labor movements with violence. And that's what he was paid for. And the corporations of Italy loved him. And then his counterpart in Germany was Adolf Hitler. That was his specialty, suppressing social movements that were not favorable to industry. So those were resets. And then, of course, we funded those people because we wanted that reset. We wanted Europe under the thumb of one strong man. We wanted Japan, we wanted Asia under the thumb of one strong country. And I guess it went wrong, and suddenly now we're in World War II, which created a whole other set of resets. The whole population was regimented and militarized. And then after the war, of course, just like after World War I, these patterns are so predictable. Suddenly we had a Ruski scare. The Ruskies are going to get us. And then we had justification for the Cold War, at which point Truman and Eisenhower just handed the keys of the nation to the military-industrial complex. They just gave it up. And it appears that Kennedy was trying to modify that. He was talking about undoing the CIA, which had been created under Truman, which was a Cold War creation, a World War II creation in a sense. How many people know that CIA was a Rockefeller creation? That the guy that ran the original OSS was a Rockefeller man. Their offices were in Rockefeller Center. And then when it became the CIA, it was just the same group of people. It was just an extension of the oil industry and the Rockefellers. And you can see that in how they operated then and how they operate now. What other great resets have we had? Well, that's quite a lot. What about the great hemp reset? Hemp, one of the most useful plants in the history of humanity. They go back to these Chinese tombs and they find hemp, right? It was used for cloth, food, clothing, shelter. It was used for material, rope, clothing, other things, animal feed. You could actually eat it. Hemp seed is a pretty nutritious food. All other things being equal, you could certainly feed it to livestock. For thousands and thousands of years, nobody ever had a problem with hemp. If somebody was smoking it, that's their business. Maybe a stupid thing to do. Not good for your health, but not my problem. But suddenly it became a matter of public health concern. By the way, we should do a whole show on the use of public health officials to do demonic things. So one of them was the hemp reset. But you ever heard of urban renewal? What was urban renewal in the United States in reality? Urban renewal was going to every neighborhood that was occupied by black people that had commercial value, condemning all their homes and businesses, paying them pennies on the dollar, and kicking them out. And if you don't know that history, just look it up. They did it in New Orleans. They did it in San Francisco. They did it in New York. They did it everywhere. Everywhere where there was a vibrant, thriving African-American urbanized community, if they happened to be sitting on nice land, suddenly there was a public health problem with that land. And in the interest of society, they were moved out. Not quite at gunpoint, but pretty close. Public health officials. But anyway, let's get back to the hemp reset. So we have this plant. It's been used by humanity, we know, for at least 4,000 years, probably a lot longer, but we know for a fact 4,000 years by every country, every society, every civilization, you name it, they grew it and they used it. And suddenly it's a big public health problem. And we got the news media, in those days, William Randolph Hearst, pounding the drum about the killer weed. Why did that happen? Well, it was to prevent a reset. And it was a little bit like the gasoline alcohol engine thing. So we'd had this plant for a long time. Cotton, for a little sidebar, cotton's been around a long time. Cotton really didn't become valuable until somebody created the cotton gin, the cotton gin. Wasn't Eli Whitney, it was one of his slaves, by the way. Obviously the guy's not going to get credit for it. But anyway, once you had a cotton gin, you could process cotton a lot faster. And suddenly cotton went from being this, kind of interesting material, but kind of hard to handle and kind of expensive, to being an industrial grade material. Right? So that was a big breakthrough. Well, a similar thing was happening on multiple fronts in the hemp world in the 1920s. Scientists were discovering tons and tons of ways to use the hemp plant, not just for rope, not just for cloth, not just for animal feed, not just for paper, but for industrial oils, for material. There's a great video floating around of something that Henry Ford did. He and his engineers found a way to process hemp to make it, I'm not exaggerating, 10 times stronger than steel. That's sort of a plastic form of hemp. And there's a video, you can find it, just Google, you'll find it, where a guy is wailing on the side of a car with a sledgehammer. Do that on a car today. Let's see what happens. The guy was wailing on this hemp plastic panel on this car. Didn't scratch it. So all these companies, especially DuPont, which were in the chemistry business, they were in the taking petroleum and turning them into chemicals. All those products were in danger of being obsolete or having real competition. So DuPont and Hearst and a guy named Harry Anslinger, who was a prohibition guy, and now suddenly he didn't have a job. Right? Cops need jobs. You better keep them employed or they'll start robbing you. So they got put in charge of going after demon alcohol. And they got charged and put it out going after demon alcohol, and then their job was changed, coincidentally, conveniently, to going after demon cannabis. So that's why a plant that had 4,000 years of recorded history suddenly became a justification for putting millions of Americans behind bars because they didn't want the plant to be used in any kind of effective way. And now they're still maintaining it. People don't get it. Anybody can throw some seeds in the ground and grow all the medical marijuana they need. It is not a hard plant to grow. It's not a hard plant to maintain. It's not terribly hard to process. Just hang it and it'll dry fine, and you're done. So what do we have? We have medical marijuana dispensaries where we're paying. I don't know what people are paying. I mean, it's $300 an ounce. I don't know what. I don't even look because it's absurd. It's 100 times, 200 times, 500 times what anybody could grow it for themselves. You don't need to. If you have a medical problem where marijuana is, by the way, smoking marijuana, insane. There's no medical benefit to it at all. Consuming it, otherwise, yeah. Long history of cannabis as a medicine, as a liniment, taken internally for pain. Smoking, that's a kind of a dirty habit, not healthy. But what are they pushing? They're pushing the smoking of it and paying 100 to 500 times what it should really cost. So what's that doing to industrial hemp production? They don't make industrial hemp production super easy, do they? It's very, very regulated. What are you going to make more money at? Growing medicinal marijuana at 100 to 500 times what it should be worth, or growing it on an industrial scale? It's pretty obvious, and that's kind of the direction things are going. So they're still managing to suppress the cannabis plant as a industrial raw material. But anyway, that was a reset. That was an amazing reset. We had this crisis. All these Mexicans and black people are smoking marijuana and they're going crazy and they're raping our daughters, and it's the end of the world. You really, if you don't know the history, you should, there are documentaries on it. I mean, they had a drumbeat that you could not believe. It was almost like COVID. It was so dangerous. And of course, it wasn't dangerous, and it wasn't causing social problems, and it wasn't the end of humanity. But they presented it that way, and they managed to make a plant, a beneficial plant, illegal. Even the corrupt American Medical Association testified on behalf of cannabis. They couldn't imagine removing cannabis from the from their prescription pad. This was pre everything being chemicalized. They used a lot of it, and they just couldn't imagine how can you remove cannabis from medicine? Well, they managed. So it's so fascinating, right? It was a public health issue, but the doctors weren't listened to. Anyway, great resets. We had them in the Depression. We had it around Prohibition. We had it around World War I. We had it around World War II. We had it around the Cold War. We had it around the prohibition on cannabis, the criminalization of cannabis. And it's just an endless, pageant of bullshit, with us always ending up with the losing end of the stick. So I'm not, there's no point in being discouraged by it. It's good to know what's going on around you. It's good not to be fooled. If there are people that get it, that can be educated, and we can educate them, and bit by bit, people do get smarter, I do believe. That's why we do Brass Check. So should probably do a little pitch for Brass Check. It is donation time of the year. We have a monthly server bill. Those emails that you get, we have a monthly service fee that we pay to the email management company. Pretty good company, AWeber. I endorse them heavily. Good guys. We have a technical guy that I have to hire because you see the level of content we put out every day, something's coming out, and that just takes time creating the pages. Then there's the time of thinking, wow, that's something too. And finding the videos. It's not trivial. It's it's what somebody would expect to pay to rent a really nice house every month. And we have advertising, but those of you who have been subscribers for a long time have followed the I don't know the right word, but the story there. It used to be, we used to be able to pay all the bills very easily with our advertising. And two things happened. Number one, companies like Yahoo and Comcast and AOL and others decided to stop delivering our email. This happened a long time ago, by the way. Everybody's crying about internet censorship. We've been the victims of that since, I'm going to say 2010. I woke up one day and we just lost 30,000 email subscribers, just obliterated from our system. That's a big hit, because an email, especially in those days, but even now, an email subscriber is worth 40 or 50 Facebook followers, right? And we were growing like crazy. And suddenly somebody flipped a switch. And next thing I know, we were having daily problems getting our emails delivered. So that was number one. And then number two, Google has basically screwed every small internet publisher on the internet. Why this isn't a news item, why nobody talks about it, why the business press doesn't mention it, but they make all their profits basically on stealing from their small publishing partners. I don't know how else to put it. It used to be a rough 50-50 split, ad split. Last time I looked, we're getting less than 10%. So for every, it's pathetic. And if we had a little more support, we could just drop Google entirely, which we really should do, I guess. But I got to pay the bills here, and so a pittance is better than a zero, right? But anyway, BrassCheck used to be not only self-supporting; it used to be really self-supporting, and now we're literally making 1/10 of what we did 10 years ago. 1/10. Not singing the blues. However, I will say this. You do get the news media you deserve. And so if you're not supporting operations like BrassCheck, don't complain about the crap news media you get. Because we're doing our job here. I'll put what we do up against anybody. Easy to beat New York Times and CNN and Washington Post and those criminals. But even the so-called professional, full-time, progressive, blah, blah, blah. I'm not, especially with this COVID thing, I have never seen a more pathetic response to a public emergency. The public emergency being the fraud. I've just never seen it. There are a handful of people doing some stuff, but boy, is it scattered and weak. This was never intended to be a person's primary news source. But God help anybody that's been trying to follow the COVID thing that hasn't followed BrassCheck. You would just be absolutely lost. And longtime subscribers that have taken advantage of the stuff we put out since February. By the way, February 1st, I posted the following. February 1st, before this was even a glimmer in the eyes of the conspirators here in the United States. I said, has anybody pointed out that Wuhan is the most air-polluted city in the world? Are we surprised? And guys in Wuhan smoke. It's hard to smoke 4 packs a day, but there are guys there that do it. It's a cultural thing. And it's an older population. China is getting old, just like every other population. So you've got a incredibly polluted city with a bunch of guys, older guys, who smoke like chimneys. And we're surprised that a few thousand of them drop dead with respiratory infections. I was saying this on February 1st. So if you've been following since February 1st, you would have been spared a whole lot of grief. Our report, Fauci's AIDS, HIV equals AIDS, Fauci's first fraud, I'm going to say is one of the finest documents of medical history ever made. And I'm not going to be falsely modest about that. We take his own words and we show that HIV equals AIDS was a fraud, and we show that SARS-2 equals COVID is a fraud, using pretty much his own words, and then the words of Nobel Prize winners, Harvard professors, science editor of the London Times. This is a very solid, buttoned-up documentation of the fraud, like which you will not see anywhere else, frankly. Hundreds of hours went into putting it together, hundreds and hundreds of hours. Glad I did it. It was hard to do. Glad I did it. And I'm disappointed that the so-called resistance, and I could name names, but basically anybody who's positioning and posturing themselves as a public educator of this fraud, for some reason they don't want to touch that film with a 10-foot pole. I don't get it. Kennedy, let me name them: Kennedy, Pam Popper, John Rappaport. It just goes on and on and on and on. They all know it exists. They've all acknowledged its existence, and they don't want you to know about it. I don't know why. I can't figure it out. Is it arrogance? Is it incompetence? Is it senility? I don't know. Why would you not share one of the most powerful educational tools in this whole war that we're in? Why would you not want to do that? And they don't. They want to put out their own stuff exclusively as if they're the only source of information. And I don't get it. I'm kind of bitching here, but this is what we're up against. It's not just that CNN and NBC and Washington Post and New York Times are lying through their teeth all day long and night. It's that the people that are filling the space of providing information are being less than effective. I don't know. That's probably the most polite way I can put it. There's some other people I would like to name too, but I'm still hoping they're going to get a clue. So you should support Brass Check. You just really should. For your own sake. Because it's the right thing to do. It's where you're getting your news from, right? You pay for the newspaper, you pay for the cable bill. Maybe you buy a magazine every now and then. You buy books. We've really, I'd say in 2020, we really did our job in a way that I don't know that anybody else did. And now you have this insight into resets. You realize that really history is not about the great threat of the Huns in World War I, or the great threat of endless depression, or the great threat of the demon cannabis, or the great threat of the Ruskies, or the great threat of demon alcohol. These are all puppet shows, basically, and misdirection. And while they're creating this pageant of baloney, they are rearranging things to their benefit and against our own. So, not to be discouraged, but solving these problems starts with seeing them and understanding them. And it's so hard to get understanding these days. It's a lot of work. It's like health. Like, how on earth can somebody be healthy if you don't take a cold, hard look at how they're living? Right? Well, let's see. I'm up till 2. I drink. I smoke. I eat crap. I'm engaged in all kinds of stressful behaviors. I go to idiot doctors who prescribe crap medicine to me. Why aren't I healthy? Well, sometimes you just, you get you draw some bad cards and you're not healthy. It's just the way it is. Then you have to work your way back to, as best you can. But a whole lot of illness in this country, in this world today, is self-induced. And if if people won't take a look at that and take steps, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's overnight. But if people aren't willing to look at the situation and take steps, well, then how are you ever going to remedy the situation? You can't. So that's what Brass Check is all about. This is the first year that I've ever really, gone on a tear saying that you should be supporting us, but really you should. Anyway, that's Brass Check, and I hope you found this interesting. And thank you for all those who have been supportive over the years. Wow. I couldn't do it. I could do it, I guess. I'd have to, take food off my table and send it to the server company. But thanks to people that do support us, I'm able to pay the server bill, able to pay the email bill, able to pay the tech helper, and able to look at myself in the mirror and think, well, you're an idiot for working, so hard for nothing, But the reward of doing this is fantastic. I mean, it really is. It's very satisfying. So I do. There is a reward just in the ability to do this, and to know that some people at least are getting some approximation of the truth. So thank you very much for your support. If you're not a supporter, do it. Do it today. And share Brass Check. That's the most important thing. They do everything they can to make sure people don't know about us. But people find out anyway. But do share. That's how we grow. Thank you very much.